Hello and welcome back to the Rookery's Archives. My name is Louise, also known as the Nerdy Archer, and welcome to a brand new episode. Episode 10, and we are back on something Syndicate themed. Just don't fear the chaos, embrace it. Come and learn some fun new stuff. There's a whole load of canon plot holes and untold information from this game alone. We have a lot to cover, we have time. And you know what? My overactive creative brain sees this as an opening to do what it does best. Start overthinking video game lore. I mean, everyone has their specialties and favourites, but this time, this Syndicate episode is not about the twins. We are going to dissect today the tumultuous life of Sir Henry Green. Don't act surprised, you all know this was coming. One of the most detailed parts about Henry's life is his time before heading to England and donning the name, which he will become most famous for. It's what the primary focus of the Underworld novel is about, yet Syndicate's in-game database gives very little about the man. And the lack of information about the Fry twins is nothing compared to the lack of information about Henry. For one, at least the twins have official statues, artwork, remembrance beyond the playthrough of their main title. Most of Henry's story is told by other people, influences and legacies and such. Sort of like Jenny in a way, but not so, as Henry at least had part of his story, the parts where he is the star, told to us in a novelisation. For someone who is so important and ultimately the reason why Crawford Starrick fails in the end, he is barely spoken about. Henry's life is still a mystery to the average player. His primary nickname throughout the adventures is The Ghost, and on paper and on screen, he is still this, proverbial ghost to us, even after we get to know him. And speaking of Syndicate, for those like me who have spent the time to explore the database files, you might already know some of this, but there is far more to this tale than we are presented with the game's brief inclusions. The entry for the database for Henry Green begins thus. Henry is as good at keeping secrets as he is at meeting people. Many do not, and most never will, know that Henry was not always called Henry. Because Henry was not born Mr. Henry Green. Henry's real name is Jayadeep Mir. For the purpose of simplicity throughout the podcast episode, I'm just going to continue to refer to him as Henry Green, even though his real name is Jayadeep Mir. This man has so many aliases, many of which we will come into, and so many different lives throughout the 19th and early 20th century. He was born on the 9th of December, 1843, to the assassin Arbaz Mir and Princess Piara Kaur. If some of these names sound familiar, that's because we have met many of these figures already. Arbaz is the protagonist of the Chronicles India game, which is set 2 years previously in 1841. They're also mentioned in the Brahman comics, although I'm yet to get around to reading those. That's right, Henry is the son of a princess, and one of the daughters of the Maharajah of India. Subsequently, Henry Green is the great-nephew of Duleep Singh, the last Maharajah of Lahore, and that his great-uncle. Does that also make Henry a prince, or did something with Piara's marriage mean that he doesn't inherit the title? Interesting stuff to think about. But during Henry's early years, and the years in which he became an assassin, the mentor of the Indian Brotherhood is Hamid from the Brahman comics. And if you have read those, then you are acquainted with how unyielding he is. His depiction in Chronicles is a bit more relaxed, but it is a personality which does not follow him during the rest of the biography. This is a man with a rule with an iron fist. In 1847, Arbaz's son begins light training to follow in his father's footsteps and join the Brotherhood, although it ramps up later on, and it becomes adamant rather quickly that Henry contained this supernatural prowess, that he held the potential to become a magnificent person, that he was so talented that he would be the best of us. He does, in his own way, prove himself to be spectacular, but just not in the way which his father wanted. Because Ethan Fry, who will we'll come to later, began to see something that Arbaz missed. The quote in the Underworld books kind of puts this best. He lacks the killer instinct. The boy can kill, and no doubt will, but he lacks something we have, you and I. Or perhaps he has something that we lack. There are assassins, of course, who do not favour the actions synonymous with their title. Sean Hastings, for one, who don't like the more violent side of their careers. It's a perfectly acceptable pathway. I mean, we've seen plenty of assassins not going into the field for one reason or another. But it's just not what Arbaz, and by extension maybe Hamid, want of this initiate. Not what the more rigorous and somewhat pitiless methods of training have demanded of them. In 1860, it was time for the boys' blooding, the term used for when an assassin initiate undertakes their first kill. The young Jayadeep, his target is this Templar named Tajindadani, and it goes really badly, as in, you thought the Fry twins' bloodings were bad? Oh boy. Getting into Dani's house, past all the guards and the defences against a nighttime attack, is the easy part. It is the easy part. Everything happens like a textbook mission. Flawless, perfect, chef's kiss. Before he knows it, Henry's in the bedroom of his sleeping target. And he pauses for a second, a minute. It doesn't matter. Because he overthinks his situation, where he's standing, what he's holding, this weapon, and that's where it all goes wrong. The coin falls out of the torque he was given to use, waking his target with the noise. In the ensuing scuffle, they fell out of the bedroom window and into the street. Henry was losing this hand-to-hand combat, and after being seen, had to be rescued by his parents from his predicament. Henry broke 2 tenets in the creed in the ensuing chaos, which is a big no-no, to be putting it mildly. One delightful euphemism called it dangerous incompetence, but everyone knows that someone who breaks a tenet, regardless of who they are and who they grew up to be, is unlikely to come out the other side the same person, if at all. And here we must remember who still leads the Indian Brotherhood, who we have seen taking care of Arbaz and the mentor of their contingent. Hamid is not a kind man. That has been very, very well established. A person can act in the service of good and yet can never be benevolent. For 5 separate decades, this man has worked and fought and defended with his own harsh outlook on the world. So Henry is cast into the darkness by him. It's an underground stronghold, more or less pitch blacks, hidden beneath the main rooms of their Amritsar's facility and for its prisoners. Most likely psychologically draining with its isolation. And in the ensuing aftermath, in all the meetings about it, subsequently Henry is sentenced to death. He doesn't die, of course. His old tutor, British assassin Ethan Fry, steps in for the boy, managing to get his sentence commuted down to exile by the smallest of margins. He manages to do this, as in, like, it's either the day before or the morning of the execution, he manages to save this boy. Arbaz never visited his son during the entire indenture, forbidding Piaro from visiting either. By the time Ethan got word and visited the teenager in his cells, this boy, 16, 17 years at most, was going to be executed within 48 hours, maybe even less than that. An order which was not contested by Arbaz Mir. Now, I have perhaps been somewhat too harsh on Arbaz in the past, most notably when I was a guest on the Hookblade podcast earlier this year, where I called him, quote, a bit of a dick. True, he might have been strict, a different man than the smooth talker we saw in Chronicles India, but no parent wants to see their child executed. How could you commit that sentence? How could you verbalise it? So he most likely did not decide it himself. Someone with a more senior rank in that particular branch of the Brotherhood would have done so. Hamid, as the mentor of the Indian Brotherhood, he is probably the one who sentenced Jayadeep to death. And maybe Arbaz doesn't like that, as furious as he is of his son breaking a tenet, but he cannot speak out about it. Or at the very least, if he feels like he can't, not against the very same man who brought him into the Brotherhood and saved him in 1839. Ethan Fry, in true Fry fashion, has no such qualms. He objects, fighting in favour of his student with a ferocity nobody has seen him used against Hamid in years. And it is enough. The boy is exiled instead, and Hamid sends the Brit to deliver the news, declaring that, so long as there is breath in his lungs, Jayadeep will be cast from Amritsar and from India. And so to England. 1862-63 saw the first line of the London Underground open to the public. It's what's now known as the Circle Line. And during the development of further transport links, the cut and cover method of evacuating the route would force people from their homes and demolishing poor parts of the city. Most importantly, the empty tunnels would become a place of refuge, a home or even businesses for those poorer than poor. And it is here that Henry makes himself a home, to integrate himself into society and put their plan into action. Now nameless, now the Ghost, this boy would take on an alias during his time living in the city's underworld. Title drop. And not for the last time. Under the guise of Bharat Singh, his first objective would be get employment with the Metropolitan Railway excavation, the people making the tube and the underground lines, and then blend in. A Templar was rumoured to be associated with this product, called Cavanagh, and the plan was for Henry to work to gain his trust, work his way closer, potentially even getting himself enrolled in the Templar Rite to do so, and then eliminate the target. And you can bet that there was a piece of Eden caught up inside all of this, because of course there is. Are we surprised at this point? Are we also surprised that it's an apple? And that Cavanagh doesn't really like Lucy Thorne? Anyway, one thing leads to another, and the alias works for quite a while. But then Cavanagh grows suspicious, and alerts the Indian Templars to kind of research this guy called Jayadeep, who may or may not be dead. In turn, these Indian Templars capture Kulpreet and Ajay, two of the assassins in charge of the darkness, who knew Jayadeep when he was younger, to try and confirm whether or not this boy was dead, to determine whether or not he is actually still active in trying to bring down Cavanagh. Ajay and Kulpreet are essentially tortured for this information, and Kulpreet doesn't want to give it, to the point that she will activate the fail-safe part of her hidden blade and take herself with a target and give her life to the cause in order to keep Jayadeep safe. Ajay, who witnessed all of this, kind of jumps ship. Now, a brief side note of Ajay and Kulpreet's whole thing. So, Kulpreet is married to someone else and is the custodian of the darkness. Ajay is a colleague who has a crush on her. It's unrequited, but it's also something that comes up quite a lot. This kind of love and sacrifice, and yeah, when he witnesses Kulpreet give her life, he wants out. He holds up his hands and basically says, I will give you the information you need about Jayadeep. I will tell you where he is, in promise of safety and security and a new life in England. And yeah, he gives him the information. He regrets it later, of course, to the point that he himself will give his life and try and find penance in a way that he can't. But Cavanagh and the Templars in England now know that Henry is alive, which is a bit of a problem. Cavanagh now knows that this mysterious fellow trying to earn his way through the closest ranks of the Templar Order is a double agent and is trying to work and eliminate him specifically. Bharat Singh is given a task. Kill an MP named Charles Pearson involved with the dig. But he couldn't break the first tenant even for the sake of maintaining his cover. During a tour of the underground line excavations, Cavanagh struck, killing Pearson and blaming Henry. And 3 different stories converge here, with all of the carnage and the chaos that entails. More so when Cavanagh claims the apple, which Pearson had made into part of his cane, and the earth collapses around them from using it. There's fire, there's explosions, fights ensue, but it isn't Henry or Ethan or even a certain Frederick Aberline who brings this to an end. It's another Templar, loyal to Crawford Starrick, that cuts away a very dangerous loose end, who wanted to try and claim the Grand Mastership and this branch of the Brotherhood for himself. So Cavanagh's dead, it's all dealt with. Problem solved, right? Wrong. No, nothing is settled at all. To get even, the Templars killed Maggie, this elderly woman who acted as a mother to the dwellers of the Thames Tunnel, and one of Henry's very first connections to life in this city. The Piece of Eden also disappears, most likely into Sir David Brewster's hands, but that is no longer Henry Green's main concern. He sits there in the tunnel for months, consumed by his grief at failing Maggie. Even as the tunnel emptied of its other residents and life continued on around him. Eventually, his parents are summoned from India by Ethan Frye, and together they lead the ghost out into the city and into his most famous pseudonym and next act of his life. Well, have you ever wondered where his name came from? Well, green for the colour of the hat he was wearing that day, and Henry for a name he heard repeatedly used during his time here. In his own little bureau, hidden within a Whitechapel curiosity shop, he built up his networks, protected London and its citizens, and pushed for the council to actually help and do something. For his old childhood tutors to come and help, it's all he does reasonably for years, as letters are sent and frustration at the lack of help for people suffering grows. He just exists. The Templars leave him alone. He survives. He thrives. But he is the only person in London, the only assassin not drawn away from the capital out of fear. But Ethan is dead at the start of Assassin's Creed Syndicate, having died of pleurisy some weeks prior to Evie and Jacob's blooding of Ferris and Brewster in Croydon. We never know if he and Henry ever met again after he left to train the twins. Henry wrote to George Westhouse, even if, like in the prologue of Syndicate, he never replies. So I like to think that Ethan and Henry kept contact in some way or another. After all, writing a letter is indefinitely simpler than secret codes with tombstones, as they had been doing for years while undercover. But there are letters, all met with silence from the council. Did they even inform him that his old mentor and tutor were dead? He evidently knows this at the first meeting of the twins, but what was that from being told was that his wit and intuition taking the silence as its own form of communication. Then, 1868, and Syndicate, and the twins. Slowly, though perhaps quicker than his future wife, he falls in love with a certain Miss Fry. Over excursions to the Kerry mansion, late nights researching on the train or at the curio shop, even putting himself back in harm's way in the field for the first time in 5 or 6 years. He saves the world, even when he wants to run. Part of the Underworld novel shows that in sequence 9, when Evie and Jake were getting ready for the ball to kind of go undercover, he's preparing to run. But it's Evie and his dedication and love for her and the city, and he can't run anymore. Even if it means going back into the field, putting himself in harm's way and acting against what he wants to do. He does it. And it saves the world. Without Henry, there is no doubt that Starrick would have killed the twins and enacted his plan, even if it had gone a little bit awry. So this man is a hero, ladies and gentlemen. He deserves your respect. But that's pretty much all we know about him. Ubisoft's information surrounding Jayadeep has nothing beyond 1873. The comic series Locus notes that he had at least one descendant live to the 21st century, but interestingly not with Evie. Which is bringing up its own questions that I am not going to get into now, because this episode is long enough as it is. But if there is any information beyond 1873 already published at the time I'm recording this, nobody's found it. Like, even on the Wiki, even his Wiki entry stops all information at 1873, which has left people to assume that he's dead by the time Evie arrives back in London for the Jack the Ripper DLC. I mean, it's a possibility. It's not one that I like, and not one that I'm going to accept. We only have 3 pieces of media to gather information from, and 2 of those are books or comics. Henry isn't even mentioned in the Jack the Ripper DLC bar a small photograph in Jacob's apartment. I, and by extension the fandom, have one question. Where is Henry? Like, where is he? In the year Henry was born, the life expectancy was like 41 years old. It's obviously going to be a lot higher depending on where he moves and, you know, being an assassin and self-trained and perfectly capable of defending himself. So he probably would survive a lot longer than the 1860s, maybe even to the early 20th century in the First World War. The Fry twins themselves survived to at least 1916. As we know, Lydia moved her grandfather and great-aunt out of the city, so they are accounted for up to the First World War. And Evie later moved to London post-Autumn of Terror in 1888. But where is Henry? How was he received upon his return to India? Were his actions helping to free London enough to redeem him in Arbaz and Hamid's eyes? Did he spend the rest of his career as an assassin and maybe even an assassin mentor, with some kind of black mark hanging over his head by some and a heroic, triumphant laurel by others? Did he and Evie marry? The final cutscene of the Pressed Flowers, like side quest collectibles, show their engagement, but the Locus comic series show Henry's descendants are not related to her, which presents... I'm not even going to answer it. No. No. I don't think that Henry died in the 1870s, as the lack of information will make this the logical conclusion. I really hope he and Evie had some kind of happiness together, regardless of whether it was in India or Britain. Maybe both. He doesn't live in Britain forever. Remember Hamid? The mentor of the Indian Brotherhood, who cast Jayadeep out almost a decade prior to the time frame of the Locus comics. The unfortunate part of being human is that we all die someday. Hamid, as much as he acts like he won't, must also abide by the rules, whether by bullet or blade, or even by time. He will pass away eventually. We'll ballpark his death around 1873 to 75, and the new mentor is announced. Is it Arbaz? Could well be. And they return to Hamid's declaration. The words of "so long as he lives, Henry will not be allowed in Amritsar." This, of course, is taken very literally, as in to the word. Within moments of the mentor's death, the Brotherhoods of the world must be informed. Pyara Kaur writes to her son and wants him home. He is allowed to finally go home. But that is something I absolutely adore about Henry's arc in all of the media that we have for him. In a franchise where toxic masculinity runs rampant and revenge is a strong motivator in why people become better assassins, Henry's story isn't motivated by that. Henry's own arc is about love. He transitions from this introverted boy trying to feel worthy of parental, more specifically paternal and parental figures, affection, into a love of themselves, and eventually transitioning into a confidence of searching for a love connection of a romantic nature with someone he finally feels worthy of. Even parts of his story that aren't his own to control are also about love. That from his parents, Ethan, Maggie in her own way, Ajay's unrequited love for Kulpreet. How it led him through the highs and lows, both destroyed and saved his and everyone's world as they knew it. It's a nice change. It's very refreshing, a new kind of leader which isn't seen as often in this franchise. Which, let's be honest, is full of this idea that kindness is a weakness. But it isn't. And Henry is kind. And you certainly aren't a weak figure to survive alone as he did for so long beneath his enemy's iron fist. And thrive as well. Like, Henry had a thriving community in Whitechapel and London by the time the twins arrived. They just helped him do the moving of the plans that they put in action. Is the moral of Henry's tale, this one of self-acceptance, even as you work adjacent to what is expected of you, is something which I think a lot of narratives could really use, particularly tales and stories aimed for men. Men can be sensitive and more pacifistic and still be a great hero. And it shouldn't be shameful. It shouldn't be hidden in the darkness. It should be, look at what they can achieve. Like, brutality, lineage, they have nothing to do with whether or not you can be a hero, become this great star. Coming away from this, I just wish we knew more about this mysterious figure. The assassin with a big heart who is sort of an anomaly in a sect which has murder as one of its techniques, and such a contradiction in the line of work. And for a man who has such a strong character that his personality alone kept him alive for over 5 years in the Templar-run city in charge of the British Empire, and not only surviving but thriving, after everyone else has been driven out, it is such a shame that we don't know more, or that he isn't remembered more. Even in the unofficial Watch Dogs Legion DLC, he isn't even referenced for his work in the city. Okay, yeah, it's non-canon. But non-canon doesn't mean that we can't learn something from this, that they aren't thinking about lineage and heroism. The twins and Edward Kenway are remembered for this city, but why should Henry deserve to be forgotten? I don't think he does. He put enough effort into this city, just as much as the others. And I, for one, would not turn away from more content about his later life, or even more moments with him interacting with his parents. Even Jazz, his voice actor, wishes for more Henry content. I am 100% up for this. Jazz, this is your open invitation. Please more Henry stuff. Henry is a breath of fresh air in this franchise and unique among a plethora of stories about revenge and bloodthirsty enemies. He has a way with words, a charisma that enamors people to him, and yet I honestly feel he's underappreciated in many ways. And on top of all of that, he's kind of cute. So, this man, he's such a good man. It's one of the reasons I brought this episode forward. My original plan for this was to release this on the December 9th, which is Henry's birthday. But after recording the anniversary episode, I've been struck with ideas and motivation to the point where I went and screw it. We're doing the fun ones now. The personal favourites are going out now. I mean, the script's got sad sitting there on my hard drive untouched. And plus, everyone loves Henry content, and we need some more Henry content. But you know what it does mean? It means you should subscribe to this channel and stick around to see, or rather listen, to some more great upcoming episodes. There's some really fun ones coming that I cannot tell you how excited I am for them to come to light. Chef's kiss. We've got some guests coming. We've got some fun episodes, little what ifs. That was smooth and integrated, don't you think? Any ideas what these topics might be? Have you a topic or question you would like to see me cover, or any information or news? I am going to be covering the AC Infinity. No leaks, no kind of bashing it, but more how they could do it in a positive manner. Because we're all about the positive mindset here. Do you even have any recommendations for guests you would like to come on, or would you like to have a guest yourself? Like a guest spot? You know the drill. Comment down below or get in touch on Twitter or Discord if you know me there. And thank you so much for listening today. I knew this episode was going to be a long one. Half an hour, can you believe it, is the condensed version of this script. It was 7 pages in the end. It was easily 10 in the first draft. I have a lot of thoughts about this boy. So, thank you for sticking around for half an hour of madness. My name has been Louise. This is the Rookery's Archives. And I hope to see you flying back to the Rookeries very soon in our next episode.